we're going to have a look at trigonometry. Now, trigonometry is a method to find missing sides of triangles. So you can see I've got 5 questions here, and each one has got a missing side labelled A. Now, you might think, well, let's use Pythagoras' theorem. But in Pythagoras' theorem, while it does work on right-angled triangles like these, Pythagoras' theorem requires you to have 2 sides. And with each triangle here, we only have one side as a clue. So we need to use something different. However, we do have the angles as clues, and we're going to be using the angles to work out the missing sides. So looking at question 1, we have a right angled triangle. One of the angles is 64.9 degrees, and the longest side, the hypotenuse, from Pythagoras' theorem, is 85 centimetres. Now, there isn't a way for you to work out what the missing side is, but your calculator does know how. And how this works is your calculator has a database of every single possible angle a triangle could take, and it knows how big the sides are relative to each other. So, for example, if you've got a hypotenuse of 85 centimetres, like in question 1, your calculator might say something like, well, if you've got a 65-degree angle, then the missing side is going to be half the size, or it's going to be 3/4 of the size, or it's going to be 48% of the size. It's going to have a value, and it's going to know exactly how big that side should be. The difficult thing for you to do is how to access that calculator's database, because it's got thousands and thousands of possible values in its memory. Now, the way we ask the calculator to look up how big the side should be is using the sin, cos, and tan buttons on the calculator. Now, you'll notice these little pyramids at the top. These will be useful for later. I'm going to write them in. We've got sin, we've got cos, and we've got tan. So we're going to be using those buttons. We'll talk about why there's 3 of those in a moment, but first we need to fill in the rest of the triangles. Now, when your kind of calculator is looking up each side of the triangle, it needs to know which side you're looking up. And if we look at the first question, we've got the hypotenuse of the longest side, and we can label that. So 85 centimetres is the hypotenuse. Let's label that with a H. And we're looking for the side labelled with the algebra letter A, and it's a small a. Now, we could have any algebra letter there, so the actual letter we're using is kind of irrelevant to what we're doing. It could be an X most commonly. So how does the calculator know? We're looking for the shortest side, and we're not looking for the longer side at the bottom. Well, as well as having a name for the longest side, the hypotenuse, we do have names for the short sides. Now, the one labelled small a, we call this the adjacent. The reason why this side is called the adjacent is because the line touches both of the labelled angles. So I've highlighted the line in green, and you can see it touches the labelled angle at the top, and it touches the right angle at the bottom of the line. Now, it's important to note that triangles have got 3 angles, and the third angle right at the bottom of the triangle, it's not labelled. So we're not looking at that. So we're only looking at 2 angles at a time when we're calling something the adjacent. If we had the other angle labelled instead, then the adjacent would be a different side. Now, the third side is called the opposite. The reason why this third side is called the opposite is because it's opposite the labelled angle. And what I mean by opposite is that no part of the line that I've labelled O touches that labelled angle. So that's the opposite. There's a similar kind of thing with a hypotenuse, where the hypotenuse is opposite the right angle, and no part of the hypotenuse line touches the right angle. So if it's not clear which side is the largest, the hypotenuse is always opposite the right angle. So how do we use these labels? Well, it's all about which labels are important, because we've got 3 labels. We don't need all 3. So in the first triangle, the hypotenuse is 85 centimetres. So the hypotenuse is an important label. We have a value for it. We've got a clue for it. The adjacent is also important because that's the one labelled with an algebra letter. The question is asking us to find that missing side A. So A is important as well. Now with the O, yes, it's a missing side, but it's not been labelled with a letter, so we're not looking for O. So in the terms of this question, we actually don't care about the opposite. We don't care what value it is. So we're not going to use the opposite in this question. So we're only using the hypotenuse and the adjacent. Now, this comes back to the triangles I've drawn at the top of the page and why the calculator has three buttons for this: sin, cos, and tan. It's all about which two sides you're looking at. So for question one, if you've got the adjacent and the hypotenuse, you'll be using the cos button on your calculator. Now, let's imagine that the A wasn't labelled and it was the O that was labelled instead, and H and O were important. Then we'd be using the sin button. There's one more combination, so you could have O and H, you could have A and H, you could also have O and A together. And in that case, and the hypotenuse isn't important, you're looking at the adjacent and the opposite, you'd be using the tan button on your calculator. Now, this all sounds quite complicated so far. There's a lot to remember. I've been talking about this maybe for about 5 minutes so far. But these forming triangles at the top of the page, you're going to remember those, and you're going to be writing them down off by heart. And it's going to be something that you don't even need to remember or revise because we're using them so much. And generally use the phrase SOHCAHTOA or SOHCAHTOA to remember these. And it's just taking the first letter of each part of the pyramid. So for the sin pyramid, we've got the S, the O, and the H, SOA. For the cos pyramid, we've got C, A, and H, cos. And for the tan pyramid, we've got T for tan, we've got O, and we've got the A, which makes the TOA. And again, it sounds quite complicated, but by the time I've done quite a lot of examples of these, this is something that's going to become second nature to you. And you'll notice we haven't actually done any maths yet. We haven't used any numbers. So don't worry about remembering everything I just said. You need a bit of context in what so you kind of understand why we're doing what we're doing. But this isn't actually something that's going to take you a lot of effort to remember once you've done a lot of examples on it. So let's actually go through the process on how you solve a question. So we're going to take a look at question one. We've labelled the triangle and we discovered that A and H are going to be important measurements for us. So what I'm going to do, and I suggest that you do this as well, I'm going to draw the triangle out again. Now, yes, I've got the triangles at the top of the page, but by drawing it for every single question, we're going to be able to label it, as you'll see in a moment, and also it's going to help you to remember it. And this is why I'm saying remembering this isn't going to be a big deal once you've done quite a lot of questions. So, A and H are important. A and H are only in the cos pyramid. They're not together in the other two pyramids. So I'm going to draw the cos pyramid. So we've got C, we've got A, and we've got H, which spells out car. We're looking for the adjacent. The adjacent is the one that I've highlighted. It's the one that's got the A symbol written on it, the algebra symbol. So what you need to do is cover up the thing you're looking for. So I'm looking for A. I'm going to just cover up A. And then the maths you do is the part of the pyramid that isn't covered. So we've got C and we've got H. Now, if these are next to each other, we're going to be multiplying. So I'm going to do C multiplied by H. Now, what is C? So C, it's cos in the pyramid at the top, so we're going to write cos down. And what these strange words mean, sin, cos, and tan, they're always talking about the angles of the triangles. So for question one, the angle we've got labelled is 64.9 degrees. So on our calculator, we're going to press the cos button. It's going to open some brackets for you. You're going to type in 64.9, and then this is really important, you only need to close the brackets. Once you've done that, we can now multiply it by H. H stands for the hypotenuse, and it is labelled, it's 85 centimetres. So on your calculator, once you've closed the brackets, multiply it by 85, and you're going to get the answer. Now, on my calculator, I'm getting very close to 36. And I have designed these calculators to give whole number answers. So the answer is 36 centimetres. That means that missing side A, the shortest side of the triangle, is 36 centimetres long. Now, at this point, I've been talking for 10 minutes. We've only done one question, so you might be panicking at this point thinking, well, there's a lot of these complicated terms. I don't quite understand what's happening here. How on earth am I going to remember all of this? But I just wanted to look at what I've actually written for question 1. So I've labelled the original triangle it's given us. I've drawn a second labelled triangle. And then look at what you actually typed into your calculator. You only typed 2 numbers into your calculator and you pressed the cos button. So you haven't actually done a lot of maths if you think about it. Now let's see how quickly we can do a second question now we've kind of gone through everything. So question 2, we'll look at our triangle and we're going to label which sides we have. So the longest side, which is opposite the right angle, is 17 centimeters. So we can label that as the hypotenuse. We're then going to look at the adjacent. Now the adjacent was the side that's next to both labelled angles. And the side I'm labelling with an A is next to both labelled angles. It's next to the 61.9 and it's next to the right angle. It's touching both. Adjacent is another word for next to. The final one is the opposite. Now this is the one with an algebra letter written on it. It's got a lowercase a. That's the opposite because it's opposite the labelled angle, the one that isn't the right angle, 61.9. So we've labelled all 3 parts of the triangle. The next step is just to think about, right, okay, which ones are important? So we know the hypotenuse is important because the hypotenuse is 17 centimeters. So we've got a value for that, we've got a clue for it, that's important. The opposite is also important because that's the one with the algebra letter. We're looking for that lowercase a, the value of that. And this time that's the opposite. What's not important is the adjacent. There's no algebra letters on that line and there's no values for the length. So we do not care about the adjacent. So once we've labelled a triangle, we've got O and H are important. So we're going to draw our formula triangle. We're going to look for a formula triangle that's got O and H in it. And the only one that does is the sin triangle. So S, O, H, and that spells out SOA. We're going to cover up the thing we are looking for. We are looking for the value of the opposite. So I'm going to cover up the opposite. And we're going to do the maths that isn't covered up. Now, what isn't covered up? The S isn't covered up for sin. And sin, cos, and tan are always talking about the angles. So that would be 61.9 degrees. And we've got the H next to it. And if they're next to each other, they're going to be multiplied. So we're going to multiply it by the hypotenuse, which is 17 centimeters. We're going to type that into our calculator. So you press the sin button. It'll open some brackets, type in the angle, close the brackets, and then multiply by the hypotenuse, which in this case is 17. You should get 15 as your answer. And look at the units of this question, that would be 15 centimeters. Now, how long did that take us? Well, it took us about 2 minutes to label the triangle, and it took us about 2 minutes to do the actual maths. And if you look at question 3 now, once you get really confident at this, look how quickly you can label a triangle. So I've got the hypotenuse, I've got the opposite, I've got the adjacent, and in this one, the hypotenuse is 80 centimeters, the opposite is an algebra letter, so I'm looking for that, and there's nothing labelled for A, and I don't need A. So you can see that once you get good at this, you can label these triangles very, very quickly, 15, 20 seconds. And now I'm ready to start question 3. So always start the question sketching out a triangle. Doing this for every question is part of learning, so katoa. This question, we've learned that O and H are important, and the only one that has O and H is the sin triangle, so S-O-H again. We are looking for the opposite, so we're going to cover that up. And what we have left over is S and H. They are next to each other, so it's going to be S times H. We go on to the medium questions, we'll have ones above each other, and that'll be a divide instead. We'll talk about that with the medium questions. So we're going to do the sine times the hypotenuse. The sine is always talking about the angle. In this case, it's 36.9 degrees. we're multiplying by the hypotenuse, which is 80 centimetres. And if you type all of that into your calculator, you should get an answer of 48 centimetres. And again, what you type into your calculator, you're pressing the sin button, you're typing in the angle and making sure the brackets are closed and containing the angle, and then you're multiplying by 80. So you're not actually typing a lot of numbers into your calculator. Half the question is labeling triangles and working out which button you're going to use to tell the calculator what you need to do. And hopefully now you're seeing the speed of these questions is getting much faster. Now we're starting to understand the basics. Moving on to question 4. So again, start off by sketching a triangle. So that's going to contain your formula pyramid. We're going to look at question 4 and we're going to label it. So we've got the longest side is a hypotenuse. We've got the side that's next to the two labelled angles. And then the last side is the opposite. That's opposite the labelled angle that's not 90 degrees. We're looking for what is important. So what's important here? The hypotenuse is 80 centimetres. We need that. The adjacent is labelled with a letter. So that's what we're looking for our answer. And we don't care about the opposite. There's no algebra letter labelled, and there's no measurement labelled. We've got an A and a H, so we're going to use the cos pyramid again. So C, A, H, spelling out car. We're going to cover up what we're looking for. We're looking for the adjacent, so I'm going to cover that up. And what I have left over, C and H, they are next to each other, so we're going to be multiplying. So C, remember sin, cos and tan are always about the angle, so because 53.1. And then the H, that was 80 centimetres. You can type all that into the calculator, press the cos button, type in the angle, close the brackets, and then multiply by the side clue we have, which in this case is 80. That should give us an answer of 48 centimetres. And you might have spotted question 3 and question 4 are actually exactly the same triangle. But we've used different parts of the calculator, we've used different clues to find different lengths in the same triangle. The main way I know that question 3 and 4 are the same triangle is that the angles 36.9 and 53.1 add together to make 90 degrees, and they've both got a right angle, which will give us another 90 degrees, which will give us a full triangle, adding up to 180. Now, moving on to question 5, I have run out of space, so I'm just going to rub out a question to make a bit of space. So for question 5, again, we're going to draw a triangle to contain our formula pyramid. We need to work out which of the 3 we're going to use, so we need to label our triangle. So this one, it might not be as clear what the hypotenuse is, but I can see the 8,4 must be the adjacent because it's next to the 8.8 and the right angle. That means the other side must be the hypotenuse, but it's not quite clear which one is the longest side. I can see though the hypotenuse is opposite the right angle. It doesn't touch the right angle. And then the smallest side must be the opposite, and that is all the way opposite the 8.8 degrees. So what's important? The adjacent is important. That's 84 centimetres. The opposite is important. That's the side labelled A, the algebra letter, we're looking for that. What isn't important is the hypotenuse. We've got no labels for that, so we're not going to use it. So which pyramid uses the A and the O? It's the tan pyramid, so TOA for TOA. We're going to cover up what we're looking for. We're looking for the opposite, so I'm going to cover the opposite up. The curve for the letters, I know it says a lowercase a, we're not going to cover up A because the lowercase a and the capital A are actually different symbols. T and A are next to each other, so we will be multiplying. So we're taking tan. Again, these kind of trigonometry words are always about the angle, so it'll be tan 8.8. We're going to multiply it by our clue, which is 84 centimetres for the adjacent. I'm going to type all of that into our calculator, press the tan button, type in 8.8, close the brackets, and then multiply by 84. And you should get 13 centimetres as your answer. Moving on to the medium questions. Now these work exactly the same way as the easy questions. It's just with the easy questions, we're doing multiplications. These ones are going to be divisions. So let's have a look at what these look like. So question 1. Again, I'm going to start off drawing a triangle from a formula pyramid. We need to work out who we're using, so we're going to highlight the triangle. So we've got the hypotenuse, which is the longest side. We've got the adjacent, which is next to both labelled angles. And we've got the opposite, which is next to the opposite the angle, which isn't 90 degrees. Which ones are important? The hypotenuse is important. That's labelled with a letter C. So any algebra letters we'll be looking for our answer. And A is important. That's labelled 5 centimetres. That'll be a good clue for us. But we're not interested in the opposite. There's no labels for the opposite. Which formula pyramid has A and H in it? The car formula pyramid is the only one with A and H. So we're going to write car in our pyramid. And when we can remember car, C-A-H, that's also the order you write the letters in from left to right. C first on the left, A second, and that's in the middle, although it's higher up. And then H you say last, which goes on the right. We're going to cover up what we're looking for. Now, for this one, we're looking for the hypotenuse. So I'm going to cover up the hypotenuse, cover up H. And if I do that, we've got A and C left. And you can see the A is above the C. So that's going to form a fraction for us or a division. So we're going to start with the top number first, the A. That is 5 centimetres. We're going to divide it by the bottom number, which is C, standing for cos. And remember, sin, cos and tan always have a value with them, and it's the angle. So it's going to be cos 67.4 degrees. Type that into your calculator. So type in the 5, type in the divide symbol, type in cos, and then make sure that 67.4 are contained in brackets after the cos. If you do mispart the bracket out, then you may get an error. And the answer you should get is 13 centimetres. Now, this time, you might remember with the easy questions, it was 10 minutes until we solved our first question. This time it's taken 3 minutes to solve the first question. And I have already explained a few things like labelling the sides and the form of the pyramids. So hopefully see now things getting faster. You're starting to remember Soccer and Toa. And this is going to be more understandable the more practice you do. Moving on to question 2. We're going to draw the formula pyramid. Really important for remembering this, do this every single time. We're going to label the triangle so we know which of the 3 formula pyramids we're using. The hypotenuse is the longest side. The opposite is opposite the labelled angle, 25.1. And the adjacent is next to both labelled angles, the 25.1 and the 90 degrees, the right angle. Which ones are important? The opposite is important, that's 36 degrees, that's a clue. The H is important, that's the one with an algebra letter, that's what we're looking for. And so the A is not important, there are no labels for the A. We've got O and H on the diagram. The only formula pyramid with O and H in it is the sin formula pyramid. So let's write SOA, S-O-H, from left to right. Cover up what we're looking for. We are looking for the hypotenuse again. We will be for all these questions actually. And then look at what's left. We've got an O over S. That's going to be a division. So we'll do the opposite, 36, divided by the sine, and that's always going to be with the angle. So that's going to be 25.1 degrees. Type that into your calculator, 36 divided by, press the sin button, and make sure that 25.1 is contained in brackets. you should get as your answer 85 centimetres. Moving on to question 3. So again, the first step is always going to be sketching a triangle to fit a form of the pyramid into. Then label the sides of the triangle. Got the hypotenuse, got the opposite, we've got the adjacent. Identify which ones are important. That'll be the hypotenuse and the opposite. We have no labels for the adjacent, so we don't care about that. Look for the form of the triangle with H and O in it. That's the SOA form of the triangle, S-O-H. And we are looking for the hypotenuse again, so I'm going to cover up the hypotenuse. So you can use your finger for that, or you can shade it in like I am. That leaves with O and S above each other. It's going to be a divide question. O for the opposite is 32 centimetres. We divided by sine, and that's always related to the angle, which is 53.1 degrees. Type that into your calculator, and you should get 40 centimetres as your answer. So try to speed up now. Question 4. Draw a triangle. Label the question triangle, hypotenuse, adjacent, opposite. Identify which ones are important, the hypotenuse and the opposite. Cross out the one that's not important. We have no labels for the adjacent. The pyramid with O and H in it is a sin pyramid, so S-O-H for SOA. Cover up what we're looking for. We are looking for the hypotenuse. Look at what's left over. O and S above each other. It's a divide question. So we're going to do O, which is 6 centimetres, divided by S, which is going to be the angle 36.9 degrees. Type all of that into a calculator and you should get 10 centimetres out the other end as your answer. And hopefully now we're just seeing how quickly we can do these questions when we're confident. Now I've run out of space again and I want to do question 5, so I'll rip question 4 out again to leave some space. And you'll notice for all these questions, all the division questions, we're looking for the hypotenuse. And if you are looking for the hypotenuse, you are going to be dividing. But there is one other situation where we'll be dividing without using the hypotenuse. So looking at question 5, we'll draw a pyramid. We'll label a triangle, hypotenuse, opposite, adjacent. Identify what's important. The adjacent is important. The opposite is important, but we have no labels for H, so we don't care about the hypotenuse. Which triangle doesn't have the hypotenuse? It's got O and A in it. It's the tan pyramid, and that'll be TOA. We're going to cover up what we're looking for. We are looking for the adjacent. And you'll see, once again, we've got 2 letters above each other, so it'll be a division. It's going to be the opposite, 60 centimetres, divided by the tangent, which will be the angle 43.6 degrees. Type that into the calculator and you should get 63 centimetres as the answer. Moving on to the hard questions, these are going to be a mix of the easy and medium questions, and we're also going to have more difficult numbers involved, and these are not designed to have whole number answers. And typically you'll tend to find in exam papers these very rarely do have whole number answers. Now before we start, it's probably worth doing a recap of what our method is. So let's break this down into a few steps to make it easier to remember. So step 1. In step 1 you are going to label the triangle. So looking at question 1, that's going to be finding the hypotenuse, it's going to be finding the adjacent, and it's going to be finding the opposite. It's then going to be identifying which ones are important. So for example, in question 1, the adjacent and the opposite are going to be important, and which ones are not important. So in this case, the hypotenuse does not have any labels. Step 2 is going to be draw your formula pyramid. So we have the 3 formula pyramids at the top of the page here. So we have SOA, and TOA, which help you to remember them. You don't even need to write the full pyramid. If you write it like this, the middle letter is floating above, which will remind you if you need to multiply or divide. And then you have step 3. Step 3, you're just going to type into the calculator. So whichever values you have, you're going to put into your calculator, and that is going to give you your final answer. So now, with those 3 steps in mind, let's start off with question 1. So step 1, we are going to label the triangle. So we have the adjacent, the hypotenuse, and the opposite. Identify which ones are important. So we have the adjacent has a value, the opposite has a value we're looking for, and the hypotenuse has got no labels. So that's step 1 complete. We've labelled our triangle. Step 2, we'll draw the formula pyramid. Remembering that while I do have a key at the top we could use, I'm going to draw it again. That's going to help you to remember it by drawing it every single time. Now I have O and A highlighted. The triangle O and A is tan, so we're going to write in TOA, T-O-A. I'm looking for the opposite, so I'm going to cover up the opposite, and we can see we've got T and A next to each other, so we're going to multiply those together. So T, which stands for tan of the angle, multiplied by A, which is the number on the adjacent, 213.8 centimetres. And if you type that into your calculator, you should get an answer for the missing side, the opposite, and I'm getting 148.04 centimetres to 2 decimal places. And that's step 3 complete. I've just typed that into the calculator. Now, this question doesn't specify how accurate to be, so I'm going to go with 2 decimal places just to be safe, but you may have questions specifically asked for 1 decimal place or whole numbers, so just be careful what the question's asking for. Moving on to question 2, let's do our 3 steps again. So, step 1, label the triangle. We have hypotenuse, adjacent, and opposite. We have values for the adjacent and the opposite, and we don't have a value for the hypotenuse. Step 2, draw the formula pyramid. Going back to our triangle, we've got A and O, so this must be a TOA question. This is the only one with A and O in the pyramid. We are looking for the adjacent this time, so we're going to cover up the adjacent. O and T are above each other, O's on top, so it's going to be a division question. So it's going to be O, which is 213.2 centimetres, divided by T, which is going to be tan of 49.6. And then for step 3, we're just going to type that into our calculator, and that should get you an answer of 181.45 centimetres. And again, just reread the question and just check what level of accuracy you're being asked for. Moving on to question 3. Step 1, we are going to label the triangle, hypotenuse, adjacent, and opposite. We have values for the hypotenuse, which we're looking for, and the adjacent, which is our clue. We have nothing written down for the opposite. Step 2, draw the formula pyramid. Now, our triangle has a H and an A. The pyramid with that is the cos pyramid, so CAH. We are looking for the hypotenuse, so let's cover up the hypotenuse. That leaves us with A over C. That'll be a division. So we'll take the adjacent, 106.3 centimetres. We're going to divide it by cos, and that'll be cos of 53.8 degrees. Step 3, type that into your calculator, and you should get 179.98 centimetres for your answer. Next, let's do question 4. Step 1, label the triangle, hypotenuse, opposite, adjacent. Which ones are important? We're looking at the opposite has a clue. The hypotenuse is what we're looking for. and the adjacent has no values to help us. Step 2, draw the formula pyramid, sketch out a triangle. We have O and H in the question, and the only pyramid with O and H is the sine pyramid, so S, O, H, so on. We are looking for the hypotenuse, so let's cover that up. That leaves us with O over S, that'll be a division. So O, the opposite, is 143.4 centimetres. We're dividing by the sine of the angle, which is 36.7. And if we move to step 3 and type that into a calculator, we are going to get the answer. And what you should be getting is 239.95 centimetres. And I'm hoping you can see now each question is taking about 2 minutes. You have to remember SOHCAHTOA, so KA-TOA, to remember the 3 formula pyramids, and you have to remember the 3 steps. Label the triangle, draw the formula pyramid, type into a calculator. You do also need to remember how to label the sides of the triangle, but look at what you're actually writing on the page. You're writing a small diagram and you're writing 1 or 2 lines of work. I've done this over 2 lines, but I'm sure you can imagine this could all be 1 line on your exam paper. One important thing to mention is that you must write all of this text down on the page. I know that all of these things can go into the calculator and you just write down the answer. But if you make a mistake, and mistakes are quite common on this, your calculator can be in the wrong mode, you can press the wrong button by mistake. Any of these things happen, you are going to get probably 0 marks. But if you wrote every single button you meant to type on the calculator on the page, then you'll get 2 out of 3 marks if you make a mistake. It's really important to write the working out down. Now moving on to question 5, I've run out of space, so I'll just get rid of question 4 and start question 5. So following our 3 steps one last time for this video. Question 5, label the triangle. We have the hypotenuse, opposite and adjacent. Identify which ones are important. We have the opposite and the adjacent. The hypotenuse has no labels, so we don't need that. Step 2, we're going to draw the formula pyramid. And this question, we have O and A, and so the only one with O and A is the tan pyramid, so T, O, A. We are looking for the opposite, so we'll cover that up. And that leaves us with T and A next to each other. This will be a multiplication. So we're going to do the tan. Again, sin, cos, and tan are always talking about the angle. This one's 43.8 degrees. And we're going to multiply it by the adjacent, which is 115.5 centimetres. Step 3, type all of that into your calculator and you should get 110.76 centimetres to 2 decimal places. And one last reminder, the sin, cos and tan values that are in your calculator's memory all have quite a lot of decimal places. So all these questions will be rounded. So do check through the question at the end and just make sure what it's asked you to round to. And if it's not asked you what to round to, then 2 decimal places should be fine.